The name of the piece is Within the Forest, Without the Forest. As we developed the project, we quickly recognized that there was this moment where you kind of left the nature you're in some ways. I mean, it's transparent, but as you enter the piece, you see the forest kind of through a different lens. So in a kind of metaphorical way, you leave it, but you're also within it. And that duality is something that also resonates through other aspects of the piece.
And so for us, the piece kind of came about from thinking about an architectural tool in some ways that would allow that sort of enhanced and saturated experience to occur. And so that's where some of the things that we came up with in the form of the color, the size, the overall shape, all came about.
As architects, we typically work in urban environments. So for us, it was very exciting to be able to conceive of architecture in a completely, non-architectural setting. How do the parameters of design, of architecture change when the context immediately changes? And so through our collaboration and conversation with Jenny and Mikey, we kind of, in this interesting way of this kind of distant dialogue between us, created a piece that was partly a concept developed from us and a kind of on-the-ground knowledge of how Bernheim operates.
In order to address challenges, we also have to give proper thanks to the team and the crew. I think everybody here has been incredibly instrumental in not only helping us conceptualize this project, but more importantly, help us put this thing together and to come to the challenges. Those ranged from bugs, swaying of the trees, general fabrication, and everything. So without Mikey and Adam, this wouldn't have been accomplished.
Finding the right material, doing multiple prototypes in LA, figuring out the way that we were going to execute it, because if we got here, we didn't have a game plan. This would never have happened in a week. In terms of being here, the biggest challenge was just dealing with something that's live. For us as architects, when you put a 2x4 by 12 piece of lumber, it's going to be pretty much the same length every time, but when you have trees that are swaying, when you have trees that have dynamic shapes that are not straight lines, they curve, they kink, they expand. Setup was the hardest part. Figuring out how to lay out the cables exactly so that they would be plumb was probably the hardest part. Once we got that, the fabric went up in today. We did all of this today. Fabric's the easy part. Getting the cables right and measuring it out was very difficult.
The primary fabric is a debris netting that's been coated in a PVC coating, which allows it to withstand not only tremendous weight, but also the general elements. Resilience against sun, wind, and etc. The porosity allows wind to pass through as opposed to catch it like a sail, which also works in our benefit considering the dynamic forces at hand here. The fabric itself is draped and tensioned against cables that are 1/8-inch thick stainless steel wire rope that we had to, as we went up, continue to put some additional tension to, because again, with a total of 13 of these wire ropes, the amount of tension placed on the trees themselves essentially forced the trees to, in some ways, tilt in. And so we have to consistently go up and retension everything. The process itself and the material is very common in construction sites. So from that point of view, we're not worried too much about its durability. However, how it comes together is the part where we have to experiment and come up with a good strategy.
For us, it was always about not imposing a novel language, which is why we immediately decided to work off of the trees as opposed to creating a self-standing element. And the mere decision that we made to do that is really tied to our inspiration, because we feel in nature there's a vastness that buildings are just unable to really capture. And that kind of negotiation and kind of like reading the experience of being in nature was paramount to the way that we even conceived the project. The fact that the color is red, it's not by accident, it's reddish orangish because it's kind of on the opposite sides of the color wheel. And so when you look at something that's of this color that's red and then you look at the green, your eyes take a second to adjust and it makes the greens greener. And so, yeah, the inspiration was really nature itself, and how can we recalibrate how we think about architecture in a way that would really only be possible within a forest. It is a very impressive format. It is a very kind of bold in its appearance, but the intention is very simply, it's like you go into a space and when you leave it, you have a different understanding, a different appreciation, a different way of looking what's around you. Maybe it's the way that you look at the nature through the veil. Maybe it's the way that you perceive a tree within it. Because of the scale, which is of course smaller than the rest of the forest, it allows you to maybe focus on something different simply because the space becomes smaller. And it's really just this device that allows hopefully visitors to see their environment in a different way.
We realized that at the scale, despite it being so massive, it's in fact, in the context of the forest, very small. The fabric strips, in some ways, allow it to function as a ruler, to somehow measure the forest and realize that, in fact, as massive as this piece is and as big as you might, as a human being, feel, you're actually quite tiny relative to the rest of the context around you. Like a campanile would mark a piazza in an urban setting, this in some ways acts like a marker within the forest for you to, to guide you into what is already an incredibly beautiful space. The act of actually emerging from the space is the sort of key, I guess, concept for us that we were trying to achieve.